Hi, this is Maisie.
And this is Sean, and this is Our Rude Awakening.
Hot topic. Yes.
Hi, friend.
Hi, friend. What's a hot topic?
So, for those who are just starting to listen to our podcast, a hot topic is something we do in between our normal episodes when there's something so pressing in the news and we just need to have a discussion about it. It's been dominating our group chat, and we just need to get it out because we know if we're talking about it, you're talking about it.
Most definitely. And what we're talking about today is the BAFTAs. And basically, for anybody who doesn't know, it's part of the film award season, and it's just like the UK's Academy Award. So it's a major event. And Sunday on the BBC, there were two Black actors, Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, from the movie Sinners. They were giving out the first award of the night, and someone shouted the N-word with a hard R. And I believe they shouted it twice. And you could see on their face, Sean, like there was a pause, and then they kept on going. And when we saw that, because it aired, it was like, what the heck is going on?
Right. First of all, kudos, peak professionalism, because Delroy Lindo looked like he was about to whoop somebody's ass. But they moved on gracefully. And I believe that it's because in the beginning of the broadcast, not heard to television audiences, but heard to the in-person audience, there was an announcement about a guest in the audience who had Tourette's syndrome. And a note was made that there may be outbursts throughout the night. So I think there was recognition of that in the moment, still shock and hurt, offense, etc.
I believe if you were watching it, they did have Alan Cumming, who was the MC of the night. He did talk about Tourette's syndrome.
I read an article that said they had erased that from the broadcast that aired.
No, it was only, like you said, in-house. John Davidson is the person, he's been an advocate for talking about Tourette's. He does deal with that condition. There was a documentary about him, and he was there for a reason. His movie about his life or based on his life called I Swear was up for some award. But back to Alan Cumming, he did talk about Tourette's, and people thought he was reading from a teleprompter, but another sticking point is he said, for all those who may have been offended, something to that effect.
Right. And from what I understand, there were outbursts throughout the night where he called women various insulting terms. He made various outbursts throughout the night. I'll just say that those outbursts never made it to air.
Right.
However.
And that's another huge thing, because it also looked like he only did it then and there.
Right.
And it was kept in.
Exactly. So there is a lot to unpack here, because part of this conversation deals with accountability, which we'll get to, both on the part of the BBC or the editors for the show.
And yeah, both of them.
And in terms of the hollow apologies, empty, improper apologies.
And you know what, Sean? So, I feel like this instance really struck a chord with people, mainly based on what you were just talking about in terms of if you were offended. I'm sorry if you were offended. We have to deal with that. We hear that so many times when people say or do something racist. And it doesn't feel like a real apology, like you said.
Right. I agree. The apology feels hollow and sort of falls on deaf ears. But a lot of the debate online was centering around, do we give some allowance here for the underlying condition that John David was suffering from? And so that sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to understand. And I knew a little bit about Tourette's because my mom watches a show on TLC, or she watched. I have no clue if it's still airing, but the name of the show was Balin Out Loud, and it's a reality series on TLC that follows a young girl, not too young, she's in her 20s, who's living with severe uncontrollable Tourette's. But I did see an episode, and she was in the airport and yelled out that she had a bomb, and
Oof.
so it was that kind of inappropriate thing that can draw attention that obviously you wouldn't willingly choose to say. And so I looked up on Google, and generally what I've seen is tics, mm, like motor tics.
Right,
So
facial and
quick
things like that.
movements,
Yeah.
jerky movements, eye blinking, sometimes vocal tics where people are whistling or making sort of a nondescript noise, or they may curse. I've seen some people curse. So I went down the rabbit hole to kind of situate myself and make sure I understood the condition as much as a non-sufferer can really understand a
You know
condition.
what, Sean, I think and because there are a lot of people that felt like, how could I think they know of Tourette's or sometimes, unfortunately,
Mhm.
it's like in comedy shows or, movies, and it's
Right,
like, well, why did this person say it on purpose? Like, they never heard of anybody doing that unintentionally. Like, it didn't seem
right.
you don't understand. So what did you find?
And it had basis in reality, right? So you waited for the Black people to be on stage before yelling the N-word, and it wasn't just towards Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo. Apparently, it had happened throughout the night. He directed the same racial slur at 2 other Black women. So it was this idea of if you know when the term is appropriate or who the term would be derogatory against, then is it really involuntary? And so what I found for Tourette's in itself is that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by involuntary repetitive motor and vocal tics, usually appearing between the ages of 5 and 10, but it can manifest into your adulthood if you're not managing it properly, or sometimes if it's a very severe version. In terms of the tics that cause you to yell out obscenities, there's a different type of Tourette's called coprolalia. Coprolalia is an obsessive or uncontrollable use of obscene language that manifests itself through Tourette's syndrome. So I decided to go on TikTok. So take it for what it's worth. But I
My
did find
goodness.
a couple of Black female creators who suffer from Tourette's. One is Janelle Bean,
Okay.
and the other is Shayla Amamaya. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Shayla Amamiya. And both talked about ableism
Mhm.
and that you can't really blame someone for the tics that they have. There is a brain chemistry issue. There is a misfiring of neurons, and there's no way to control that. And that it doesn't necessarily mean that the person harbors racist feelings underneath. It's just that sometimes obscenities come out, and it could be something that you saw, something that you heard, something that you feel compelled to repeat. You can't control it. But both were cautious in saying that they understand people's bad feelings about it, people not understanding it, and that there should be accountability, but it's not necessarily only placed with John Davidson. And that's where we get into the accountability conversation, because John Davidson did apologize. But again, the apology sort of landed like Alan Cummings' disclaimer at the end of the broadcast. The other part of it is the broadcast was edited prior to the worldwide audience seeing it. and tons of things were cut out of the broadcast. Someone had yelled out Free Palestine during the broadcast. That was cut out, as were all of John Davidson's other tick moments throughout the night where he insulted women and several other people where he just yelled out during speeches and things like that. And somehow, when he yelled out the N-word towards Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, the BBC says, "Oh, we missed that,
Yeah, they
but
did.
sorry if you were offended."
Yeah.
So it rings hollow. I don't think that's a sufficient apology. But even for John Davidson, if you know you have a condition, I'm not going to say you don't have a right to be in the building. You're having the biggest moment of your career, and you want to be there to be able to see what happens. Does your film get an award or not? You want to participate in the festivities. He did end up leaving early because the tics got so uncontrollable, but I'm not going to say he has no right to be there. But at the same time, if you know that you have a condition and you know that someone was offended by your actions, whether involuntary or not, you can't just say, "I don't want anyone to think that the words that come out of my mouth." How did he put it?
He said
You
that they carry no meaning. They're not intentional and they carry no meaning, and he was horrified if anybody thought that they did.
But again, that's not an apology.
Yeah,
It doesn't acknowledge the two particular actors who were embarrassed by the outburst.
right, and I could see when you sent me the TikToks of those 2 creators, how they were getting a lot of pushback in terms of some people saying, "He didn't mean it, it wasn't racist, you're too sensitive, get over it," and other people were saying, "He shouldn't be there," and they were side-eyeing the fact, as we all noticed, that he only said it when there were 2 Black actors up there, and the saying of the inappropriate things, like you mentioned, the woman who's saying, "I have a bomb and stuff in an airport." One of the things I do think that was good that they did mention that that person was going to be there and that John Davidson was going to be there and that there might be these outbursts. Yet again, they did not put that in the the televi the televised
Right.
hearing, and maybe they really thought that they had gotten them all out, but, like, we heard it, everybody heard it, and to your point, you saw it on their faces. So, the fact that they said, quote, unquote, that they missed it, but they were able to take away, from somebody's speech, and if somebody yelled out "Free Palestine" and take out the other outbursts, yet again, a side eye, and we do know that there are some racial tensions and a racial history in the UK. So, there's that, but I'm glad that it brought this to the forefront in terms of understanding people's disabilities and how they can and understanding Tourette's, because I
Mhm.
think ableism, that term is something new, and Tourette's isn't something that I don't think most of us encounter, and if we do, we think of it as in a certain way, oh, some outbursts or tics and things like that, not somebody
Right.
yelling out, especially.
Racial obscenities.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there is that, and there was a part of me, Sean, I have to admit, it's like, well, if you see yourself starting to do that, you might wanna remove yourself from that situation. But then
Right.
by the same token, like you said, this is like a highlight of his career, a movie based on his life, and he'd been working his whole life in terms of advocacy. Doesn't he have a right to be there?
And I also go down a little bit of a different path, and you and I had talked about this a little before when we decided to do this episode, but I do tend to defer to someone who has the condition when I'm trying to come up with how I feel about a situation. I mean, you can't really change your own personal feelings about a situation, but at least they can be informed feelings. And who better to describe it than someone who suffers from it? And then you come to the apology piece of it, and particularly knowing that he's an activist. I kind of struggle with saying, well, you need to make a sincere apology because is it really sincere? it's I look at it kind of, if he comes out and says, "I'm so sorry, I hurt your feelings," because I'm wondering if he's thinking in his mind, like, "Yeah, I'm sure you were offended, but I didn't intend to do it." And I know we talk about it's not about what you intend, it's about the impact all the time. But is the apology worth anything if it's insincere? Because I'm kind of apologizing to you for how you feel, but I can't say I'm sorry for my behavior because I can't control my behavior. So, but
Yeah, but
is that apology really a fully realized apology if I'm apologizing for something that I have no control over and I'm likely to do it again
well, you
because I
know what?
suffer from this copper lalia thing?
But you know what? That I think that you make a good point in the sense of, and from what I read, and this is my opinion, with his apology, it was about he's the one who mentioned that they gave a note at the beginning, that they spoke about the fact that he was going to be there and how everybody clapped and he felt so welcome and he was so excited to be there and everyone was so understanding, and then how he was horrified that anybody might think that his words were intentional or carried any any meaning. And again, that goes back to your intent versus impact. And in my opinion, people aren't saying, or people that really listened or understood and learned more about Tourette's, they weren't saying that this was a bad guy, but they were saying still that, to your point, it could have been edited out, but an apology goes a long way. And you don't have to apologize for what you did. You can apologize for how it made someone feel. And in my opinion, it wasn't, I don't think he necessarily needs to apologize for who he is, especially something that he can't control. But I didn't see an apology for how people felt and to
Right.
validate that feeling. I had an issue once, and it's not the same, but I had a chronic cough and I worked in an open, I had a cubicle, I worked in an open environment. And there were times when I just couldn't control. I would keep coughing and I was trying to find solutions to it, trying to, go to the doctor and things like that, trying to figure out why. And somebody who was a few rows over complained. They were in a different department. They complained about me because they said I was distracting. I don't know if she
Mm.
said, like, also, like, when she's trying to be on the phone or calling, and like I said, she was actually more than a few rows over, like, on the other side, but, me being distracting, and it made me feel a certain way because it's like, I don't mean to be this way, it's not like they were saying I could work from home, and I did feel a little bit bad about it, but it was also like, I can't help it. I'm trying to figure out ways to fix it, but I can't help it. Now, yeah, I didn't feel the need to apologize for it,
Mhm.
and
'Cause you can't control it.
yeah, and she was the only person who said anything, and, my director who was over the team lead, he talked to my team lead about it, and then, they said that they understood, and then, you feel more self-conscious. However, if it had escalated to something more, or, if she was trying to do something, I could understand, you could feel bad about it, even though it's something that you can't control. And I think that we need to sometimes look beyond ourselves, like I said, or like we were saying, people realize that this wasn't something this man could control. But again, it struck a chord in the sense of, just because somebody can't control it, then we need to be okay with it. And it's not like, we're talking about the fact that what the BAFTAs, what the BBC did, and just the fact that that word has such a horrible history. And it's
Mhm.
also about the fact that almost no matter how high you get, no matter how far you go, people use that word to bring you down and to make you less than. And it's used as a weapon. And if we feel a certain way about it, if we feel like that's disrespectful and hurtful, then we're validated to feel that way.
Of
And
course.
like, even, and I feel like that was sort of being taken away from us because some people were like, "Oh, well, he couldn't help it." And I think, I'm sorry, but I feel like even John Davidson, and I'd love to hear any other viewpoints, but I feel like he also was excusing himself because he didn't mean it. He doesn't think that, and I completely believe him. But like, I think it was great that you saw those TikTokers because there's an intersectionality and they understood that people need to be more open, more understanding, and more accepting of people with these conditions or people who are differently abled.
Mhm.
Then they also understood if you were, that it was a hurtful term and that it's okay for us to feel that it was an invalidation, that it was disrespectful, that it was hurtful. And I think that you can have two things be true at once. And it's been sort of difficult to even say that because people feel like you need to be on one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think the way that I feel about it at the end of the day is you have to leave room in the gray because, of course, it's offensive, and I feel like everybody in the room or should be outraged by it because of the term's
And you don't need
history.
to say, like, if you were offended. It should for everybody.
Right.
Like,
It
yeah,
is an offensive term. And so to your earlier point, you were saying, I'm sorry for how it made you feel. I don't want that to be mixed up with I'm sorry you felt that way, but it's I'm sorry I took an action that made you feel that way, even though I can't control it. I understand and acknowledge the heaviness of that term and how it's been used to demean Black people for centuries.
yeah,
And I apologize for the hurt that I injected into this evening.
yeah, and you
Advocate,
had.
and then just hope as an advocate that you can educate people and they'll go look up what it means, but you've also taken care of apologizing for your role in the hurt. So
Mhm. Yeah, and,
and I think, I mean, that unfortunately that comes with the illness. Like
mhm,
you were saying, you had the uncontrollable cough, which totally different context, but still, you had something that you couldn't control. And you, of course, felt bad if it was disturbing other people, but you couldn't do anything about it.
and it
So
was that
it's
one person. Other people were more understanding, but,
right.
you still have to realize that your actions or, whether you can help it or not can.
If you had the opportunity to have an accommodation so that you could work in a space where you weren't disturbing people, I'm sure you would have taken it. Same thing with how John Davidson left the show ultimately.
Yeah,
We wish maybe he had left a bit earlier, but he left the show because he recognized my tics are causing a lot of disruption and hurt feelings. I should leave. And so like I said earlier, I don't want to ever say that someone cannot enjoy the fruits of their labor and participate in an event that they've earned
yeah,
the right to be at, but also acknowledging, hey, I come with a condition. And so I have to cover myself and make sure that I don't put myself in a position to harm other people. So
yeah, and I
if I can help it.
and I do think that I know we keep beating a dead horse by talking about, BBC and BAFTAs, but none of us would have known about this. Not really. It
Yeah,
might have been a small.
I fully blame,
Yeah,
the producers, editors, network, all of them
yeah.
for increasing the visibility of this and putting this in a place where the conversation is not about the condition, largely, it's about the offense.
Well, you know what? I think, there's no winners, and I do feel.
Except the BBC.
Well,
Because they got the ratings of people going in to see what happened on the broadcast.
yeah. Well,
So somebody's laughing all the way to the ratings bank, and I don't think that's unintentional.
yeah, and I do strongly believe, and I don't want it to come off that way, that John Davidson and people with these disabilities that are very, like you said, there's some invisible and there's some visible disabilities or
Mhm.
conditions, and they have a right just as much as myself or other people. However, it's a tough thing because if your actions can disrupt a lot of people or, is it me going someplace far away, if I'm coughing or,
Right, I'm
or,
yeah.
you know,
But then in saying that, I'm also not saying you should be locked in a room somewhere.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's like I'm trying to handle my issue,
Yeah,
but
it's like it's a balance, right? It could have gone a long way with a personal talk or a personal conversation with this person, John David said, and those actors, and to your point, everybody should have had some issue with it just because of so much of a loaded word versus I'm just calling women the B word or using cursing. That using the N word with a hard R has it's such a weighted word, and I think it would have gone a long way if he had said something to them, but the only good thing that I could see, Sean, is that it did open up some conversation, and for us that want to learn more, I mean, I really did, and it opened up sort of like an ethical, maybe kind of it made me, explore some things in terms of what my beliefs are and practicing what I preach and how I would feel putting myself in someone else's shoes both ways, and empathy, and learning a little bit more about myself and about the condition. So it did strike a chord with me in terms of how people just expected Black people to just take it on the chin, like, "Oh, well, you didn't mean it. You're overreacting. Stop being so sensitive." I feel like we're told that so much. We're supposed to be stoic. We're supposed to take everything. Nothing's supposed to bother us. So that was the first thing that gave me pause. And then, I'm so glad that I learned more about the condition and how how it manifests itself. But like I said, it opened up more things for me to think about in situations that have occurred in my life or things that I've seen in terms of forgiveness, the intent versus the impact, and what that all means.
I mean, you summed it up quite nicely. I don't know what else I could add to that I haven't already said.
I was a little bit hesitant talking about some things, but I do want to be honest, but I always one thing that we've said before, like, we reserve the right to change our minds, and that's why we talk about things to each other. Because Shad and I don't always agree with what our conclusions, and she's definitely had an impact on making me think about things differently. Hearing from our family members, from other people who might listen, I want to I like the fact that I'll say this, I like the fact that we can sort of talk through things.
Mhm.
And for me, it helps me sort of redefine or get a fine tune how I'm feeling. So I would love to hear from our listeners and get their viewpoint. And if anything, learning more about the situation, if that changed or reinforced any of their own beliefs.
Yes, and if you would like to weigh in on all the things that Maisie just said, you can visit us on Instagram at Rude Awakening Pod, same place on Threads, and on Blue Sky at
Ourrudeawakening.bsky.social. Oh, and then our website. We are,
oh, yes.
yeah.
I'm I'm so used to not saying it. And also on our website at ourrudeawakening.com.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I mean, this is we doing it in 2026. So occasionally, Sean and I will interrupt our regularly scheduled programming. Yeah, if there's something that you guys want to talk about, let us know, and we'll stick it in.
Mm-mm,
That's
mm-mm.
it'll fit. Don't worry.
Oh gosh, you doubled down.
Yeah. Well, Sean, this was great. I love talking to you about this friend, and I wish the best for all those involved. And like we said, BAFTAs and BBC do better.
Please.
That's one thing that everybody can agree on. All right, you have a good one, Sean.
You too. Love you, friend.
Love
Bye.
you too. Bye.
Na, 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 na,
We're
na.
not doing that anymore. I don't know
Right.
what we're gonna. Let me stop you. We should still do it old time. Anyway, let me stop this.